We're starting an exciting chapter today in the Tanya, the book we're studying, chapter 45. Of course, there's some very strange news out of United States last night, so we want to dedicate our learning today to the safety and health of anyone affected by the tragedy in Wisconsin. All those that are injured should have full healing, and God forbid, those that have passed away, their families should have peace and comfort, and we dedicate this class to all of that. And also tonight is an interesting night for this style of Kabbalah for Chabad Hasidus, in that it is the anniversary of the liberation of the author of our text, of the Alter Rebbe. So it's not just a historical anniversary, but it is actually celebrated as called the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, and it's when the Alter Rebbe started teaching in this expanded format. We'll talk about it a little later today, but I wish everyone a good Yontif for the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, Yud Tes Kislev, and we're starting chapter 45. So this is, for me, one of the most inspiring chapters. We've got some people here in the class in person, some people online. I hope you'll find it as inspiring. We've been learning so far about the various types of love and awe that we can awaken based on different meditations the Alter Rebbe has given us. So the categories are, we have love and awe, and in awe we have a lower and a higher form of awe. In love we have Avat Olam, which is a lower form of love, which is connected to anything in the world, and Ahava Rabbah, which is just loving God's essence, nothing to do with anything created in the spiritual or physical worlds. And then we learned a few hybrid types of love, the love of my soul desires you at night, and even the love of a child for a parent, which allow us to access both types of love, Avat Olam and Avat Rabbah, which normally would be the purview of tzaddikim. But the basic category is love and awe. You need love and awe from our meditations, and that will elevate all that we do Jewishly. That's the whole point. Today, we're going to learn about a new meditation. And sometimes people learn this chapter and they say, there's love, there's awe, and now we get to rachamim, compassion, the third of our spiritual emotions. So now we're learning how to awaken compassion, rachamim. That's not the case. We're learning how to arouse rachamim, yes, but in order to access that very highest form of love that we talked about, Ahava Rabbah. So normally it's just tzaddikim that get Ahava Rabbah. We learned that you need a complete state of awe all the time in order just to be a candidate for it. And also we learned that it only comes as a gift from above. It only comes as a gift from above. Sure, Doreen, if you want to close that door, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. I love the kids in our building. There they are. So this is a meditation that will allow someone like me, who doesn't have complete awe. I don't walk around, I'll share with you, I don't walk around night and day in a state of total awe that the infinite is watching me. I try to remind myself I'm better than I was a year ago and 2 years ago, but I wouldn't say that's what I'm thinking all the time. Sometimes I'm distracted or I lose myself. So even if you don't have a total awe, and even if you haven't worked on yourself to the point that you're at that level, this meditation will allow you and me to access even that highest form of love, Ahava Rabbah, for reasons we'll discuss. But everything we've learned so far requires some level of working on myself, and we want to be working on ourselves, of leaving the level I'm at, and then reaching a higher level, and then leaving that level and reaching a higher level, and refining myself such that I can actually, my heart is the vessel that can receive that kind of love. Because the more I'm thinking about material things, about my coffee, and about money, and about even friends and children, which it's a beautiful, beautiful spiritual joy, but still I enjoy it, right? There's a me there. The more I'm focused on that stuff, the harder it is for my heart to allow this love to happen. And so I want to work on myself and refine myself such that I can receive that love. But as I said, this chapter is a shortcut for all of that. And with this meditation, it's almost the less you've been working on yourself, the more effective this meditation is. And you'll see why. Let's go right in. We're in this edition of the Tanya, page 688. Od yesh derech yashar lifnei ish lasok b'torah u'mitzvot lishman. Marcus, go ahead.
There is yet another direct path open to man, namely to occupy himself with Torah and mitzvot that are lishma, for their own sake. I didn't butcher that, did I? Okay. For their own sake, with the innermost feelings of heart and soul.
Okay, Linda, is that audible online? Anyone listening can hear that? We're good? Good. So there's another direct path. So he calls it yashar, direct, meaning I don't have to stop and work on myself and crush my attachment to materiality and awaken a sense of being more spiritually sensitive. It's direct. It's direct, right? It doesn't take intense meditation necessarily. It's direct. And beautiful that he uses the word yashar, because we're talking about inspiring rachamim, and we're going to get into Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the three forefathers. Each of them represent one of the midot, which we've learned, right? Avraham is chesed, Yitzchak is gvura, and Yaakov is rachamim. What's Yaakov's other name? Yisrael. So when he calls it a derech yashar, a direct path, he's also alluding to Yisrael's name. Yisrael, Yud Shin Resh, has the same rate as Yashar, and also Yeshurun, the other name of Yaakov. So it's not just a direct path in that I don't have to do all this work necessarily. It's also a path through Yisrael, through Yaakov, through compassion. So you see, even these one word brings out all the levels of meaning that the Alter Rebbe writes with. Al Yidei midato shel Yaakov Avinu alav hashalom shehi midat harachamim. Go ahead, Eleanor.
Through the attribute of our forefather Jacob, peace unto him, this being the attribute of mercy.
Right, so we're going to use the attribute of mercy now. Mainly we've been using love and awe, right? The emotional internal feeling of chesed and gevura, which is ahava and yira. We've been using those to elevate our mitzvahs. Now we're going to find a way to get to that ahava, that love, but using rachamim, compassion, which is the feeling, the inner aspect of tiferet, of the third. Right? And if that's unfamiliar, we've got the whole intro to Kabbalah online. Please look that up. We go through all the midot and the definitions, etc. And what are we trying to do? As he said, we're trying to do Torah and mitzvahs lishma, for their own sake, which, as we learned, means doing it with love and awe. Doing it love and awe, where you're trying to create a home for God down here. You're doing this for God's sake, to give God nachas, because you have love and you have respect for God. So when I'm learning, if I fill that mitzvah of learning, or if I'm giving tzedakah, if I fill that mitzvah of tzedakah with love and awe, and I'm caring about God, now I'm doing it lishma. I'm doing it for its own sake. Not because I want to feel good, not because I want to have knowledge, but purely for the sake of the Ein Sof. Any questions about that, online or here? Let me just, good. לעורר במחשבתו תחילה רחמים רבים לפני הרושם.
Through the attribute of our forefather Jacob, peace unto him, this being the attribute of mercy.
Good, and this is accomplished by first arousing in our mind great compassion before God. So we're going to arouse compassion. So let's remind ourselves, chesed, gevura, and tiferet, or emotionally love, awe, and compassion, how they relate to each other, right? We remember that chesed is just pure giving, pure I want to bestow, and it's completely indiscriminate. It's completely indiscriminate. When I'm in a mode of chesed, I'm just giving. I'm handing out $20 bills to anyone I meet. I don't care if they're wealthy, poor, need it, don't need it, deserve it, don't deserve it, it'll help them, not help them. I'm the one who's in a giving state, and chesed does not even notice, is this the right thing for whoever I am giving to? Gevura is the opposite. Gevura, or deen, if you're going to talk about the sense of discrimination, deen means judgment. That is discrimination in the good sense, right? Not discrimination as in I think certain people are less than, and I'm discriminating against them, but discrimination in that, I want to eat organic food and not organic food. Discrimination as in, I want to spend my time learning things that are good for me and not just learning nonsense, right? Discrimination as in, this is Shabbat and this is the weekday. So every Havdalah, we discriminate between holy time and mundane time. Gvura is all about discrimination. Gvura will say, oh, I'm not sure this person deserves my help. I'm not sure this will help them. I'm going to withhold it. And then what is Rachamim? Rachamim is when you notice that maybe the person doesn't deserve it, or maybe it's not, there's a question in my mind, but I have mercy on the person, I have pity, they really need it, and I'm going to give anyways. So Rachamim is a state of giving where you are still discriminating, but you overcome that and you give anyways, right? Or you notice the person does need it and you give anyways, either way. Chesed didn't notice, Gvura held back, Rachamim gives anyways. Right? Or gives noticing that the person needs it.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm a little confused because the word mercy and the word compassion were both used. Are they the same in this context?
Yeah. Rachamim can mean mercy or compassion, right? In English, we got a lot of synonyms. So
Okay.
Rachamim in Hebrew includes both my sense of mercy and compassion. In English, I know mercy and compassion have different connotations. So,
Okay.
I keep it big picture. I wouldn't split the hairs on the English words.
And the other comment, isn't there a dark side to Gevurah too? Not just...
There's a dark side. The question, is there not a dark side to Gevurah? And my answer would be there's a dark side to every one of these midot.
That's right.
And you know what the dark side is? It's my animal soul. It's me. It's my ego. Right? So your divine soul and your animal soul both have this full complement of midot, and they can both energize and use them. And what's the dark side of chesed, obviously, from the animal soul, is just I'm eating because I'm hungry and not because I want to help people, right? I love someone because they appeal to me, and I'm only interested in my own pleasure, not because that I want to help them, right? So chesed, any inappropriate desire, that's the dark side of chesed. That's when my animal soul is channeling chesed. And it's just as dark as the dark side of Gevurah. The dark side of Gevurah is when the animal soul channels Gevurah. That usually looks like anger. Right? Oh, hold on. The world is not looking the way I think it should look. I want to control it. Therefore, my animal soul is going to lash out and try and change divine providence, change what's happening around me. I know better than God. I'm going to tell you, I'll give a piece of my mind, right? That's the animal soul using Gevurah, and of course it's a dark side, right? And the dark side of Rachamim, by the way, is self-pity, right? Rachamim is there for me to have pity on other people and give them the benefit of the doubt and help them. It's not there for me to wallow in my own self-pity and say, oh poor me, or be arrogant about myself and I let myself off the hook and only see my good side. So every one of these midot has a positive, constructive side and a negative, destructive side. Yeah? So now, I hope it's enough of a snapshot, a reminder of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet. Now we're going to go inside the technique of how we use Tiferet, compassion, or Rachamim in this case. And Tiferet is the Midah, Rachamim is the emotional experience of the Midah, right? So Tiferet is beauty, and Rachamim is compassion. Ha-memale kol amin v'savev kol amin. Linda, do you want to read for us? You want to unmute and read at the bottom of 688? There you go.
Yeah. Who pervades all worlds and animates them with a vitality which is enclosed in and compatible with the created beings and encompasses all worlds and animates them with a vitality that transcends created beings and affects them without, as it were.
And we'll do one more, Linda, so stay unmuted. V'chula kameh kela chashiv.
And in comparison with whom everything is accounted as nothing.
Beautiful. Yeah, go ahead.
This then is the exalted level from which the soul has descended.
So what are we doing here? We are arousing compassion for God, which is a strange thing to think. God's infinite. God hasn't changed. God's abounding everything. God's total infinity. How am I going to have compassion for God? Because remember, back at the very first chapters, we learned, what is my soul? What's the definition of the divine soul? It's an actual piece of God, chelek elokah mimal, an actual spark of God coming down into the world as me and having to enclose itself in your ego and my ego, in your consciousness and my consciousness. And so God has decided to have a puppet show. God has given up control of the puppet, so to speak, and now God's right there powering my ego and your ego and going through all the bad decisions that we're making and going through all the physicality that we're experiencing. And God is, so to speak, trapped in that, right? So that spark of God, that's my soul, that's in me, it's not hard to arouse compassion for that when I think about it. Actually comes from the Ein Sof, the source of life, which, as you just said now, it fills all worlds. So that's one level of light, which is that the Ein Sof emits light that creates and fills the entire world. A second level, a higher level, it doesn't even relate to the world. It encompasses all worlds. That's Sovev Kol Amin, a higher level of light. And even a third level, before whom everything is non-existent, was never created, doesn't exist, a third highest level. It's that level of spark that's come down through all the spiritual worlds, through everything that we've described in our course so far, right down to the very bottom of existence, and has wedged itself and enclosed itself in me and in my physical body. So even before I've done anything wrong, right? Even before I wake up in the morning, I start making all my lovely decisions. Just being clothed in a physical body, for whom spirituality is possibly blocked, for whom God's presence is not apparent, that already is such a descent that it's painful for that spark of my soul. It's painful for God, so to speak, to come down and have to function in a physical body. Just that. And that could be the body of a complete tzaddik. That could be somebody that's never done anything wrong, never will do anything wrong, is doing amazing things. Still, the soul is so confined because the soul is so spiritual. It just wants to be one with God. It just wants to bask in God's light. And now it's trapped here. It's like, we understand that one of the punishments that can happen to a person is that they're reincarnated into the body of an animal. Why is that a punishment? Because I'm a human. I like to have abstract thought. I like to have complex emotions. And if I'm in the body of, an alligator, I spend my whole life cold-blooded, hunting things. I can't express my higher intellect and perhaps my more complex emotions. So to be reincarnated and trapped in the body of an alligator when I'm the soul of a human, it's going to be a life of frustration where I can't express my deepest being. So that times, you can't imagine how much that's what it's like for a spark of the Ein Sof to travel down and just be enclosed in a physical body, even if I do everything right, even if I don't hurt anyone or let myself down, I live my whole life at the highest level, it's still already something that would arouse compassion in me to think that a spark of God is to come down and endure this level of physicality. V'nitlabesh b'mashka dechivya.
And has been clothed in the body, which is called a serpent's skin.
Right, the body, let's go for this note. Yeah, go ahead, the body.
Oh, the body is referred to as a skin, since it serves as a garment to the soul. As the verse states, "You have garbed me with skin and flesh." This is moreover the skin of a snake, since the body in its unrefined state is loathsome, as explained in chapter 31. The divine spark must enter into such a body.
Right, so the snake refers to the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the whole thing refers to klipa. So the skin, the serpent's skin or the body, that's perfect klipa, ultimate klipa. Right? And when we say klipa, we mean a shell, we mean the covering. And in the spiritual world, there's still klipa, but that klipa recognizes there is God and that God's creating it, but they see themselves as having some power. That's why, as we described, there's something called Elokim Acherim, other gods. That's the forces of klipa as they exist in the spiritual world. But when they come all the way down to here where we are, in the physical world, now the klipa has a special skill, and that is it doesn't even recognize that there is God. Klipa in the physical world obscures God so completely that I wake up in this body and I think, maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't. Up to me, right? I have no proof. I don't see it. So the klipa down here is the most dense, most coarse klipa that exists in creation. And it's there that this spark of God itself comes down and encloses itself. So if you just picture that journey, you're feeling a sense of like, oh, what is God experiencing? Oh my gosh, right? Just think of how difficult that is, what a descent that is for this spark, which comes from the very highest heights and descends down to the very lowest aspect of creation. Right? It would be a terrible descent for that spark to descend just to the next world down. That would be an infinite drop. And say, I'm a created being. I don't want to be a created being. I want to be just one with God, right? What am I doing here in this world where things think they exist and think they're created beings? That's just the world of Bria. Then it goes down to the world of Yetzirah, and it's like, I have a form? I don't want to have a form. I want to just be one with God. What am I doing with a form? And then it goes down to the world of Asiya, where it's like, what? You can do things? You think you're independent of God and you have action? I want to be back with God. And then it comes all the way down to my body, where I'm in the physical side of Asiya, and it says, I can't even see godliness here at all. Like, it's just complete darkness. Like, I'm so far from my source, from where I started. So from the very highest to the very lowest. And it's here for a whole lifetime. So that's the work we're doing, of like considering that spark. And that spark is who? That spark is actually God. When I have compassion on that spark in my soul, I'm also having compassion for God. And that's key to this meditation. Harachok me'or pnei hamelech betachlit ha'herchek. Go ahead, Eleanor. Which is far removed.
Which is far removed from the light of the king's countenance, at the greatest possible distance.
It's as far down as it can go. Ki holam hazeh hu tachlit haklipot hagasot.
Since this world is the nadir of the coarse kalipa, that is, the world is coarser than the coarsest of kalipa found in the spiritual world.
Hulu, etc. So this is, as I said, before we do anything, we're already now here where klipa, where the shell, the external aspect of reality, blocks everything about God, and it's as if you could say it's not even here. Next page, 690. Vifrat k'sheyizkor al kol masa v'diburav u'machashavto miyom heyoto asher lo tavim hema. Go ahead, Linda.
And especially will be great.
Will he feel?
And especially will he feel great compassion for his soul when he recalls all his actions and utterances and thoughts since the day he came into being, unworthy as they were.
So if it wasn't enough to try and picture the descent of the spark of your soul down to being clothed in a physical body, now let's add everything I've thought, everything I've done, everything I've said for that whole journey, for my whole life. So all the moments where I let myself down, all the moments where I was at my worst, all the moments where I was self-centered, and picture this is a spark of God that only wants to be united with its source, only wants to be one with the infinite, and it's going through all my narishkeit. It's going through every mistake I've done. And imagine the pain where it's saying, I'm a piece of God and I'm down here so far from it, and now I'm having to be enclosed in this animal soul that's doing this stuff, that's hurting people, that's degrading the world. It's torture, right? It's torture. Imagine, and you can't imagine. Imagine, someone came and hypnotized me or made me into a zombie, and I'm harming my own family, God forbid, and I'm watching this, and I'm seeing my hands hurt the people I love, and I'm crying out in pain. It's the worst thing. You're trapped in this journey with this ego when all you want to do is be united with God. So now we really see why we should have compassion on the spark of our soul in this technique, and how my heart starts to really feel such mercy for what's happening and what's happened to the spark of my soul. So now we bring a very, very common metaphor for how we should see this. Umelech asur bar hatim birhite mocha. We're back? Yeah.
And the king of the world is thereby fettered by the tresses, meaning by the impetuous thoughts of the brain. God is, so to speak, fettered by his impetuous thoughts.
So there's a few ways you could translate this. You know, the king is fettered by the tresses. It's from Shir HaShirim. But really, Bar Hatim talks about, we just saw recently when Yaakov wanted to create more sheep to increase his wealth, and he put sticks in front of the water channels, and the water's flowing through these channels, and the sheep were in heat. That's the same word. So a channel with water flowing through it, really it's a gutter. So imagine, old cities, and you have all the waste being dumped, and the gutters are flowing through, and you have, there's not modern plumbing. You've got all kinds of human waste and garbage and smelly stuff just running through in these gutters. That's really what the translation is. And you're basically taking the ruler of the world, you're taking God, and you're taking God's face, and with what we're doing, we're just kind of sticking it right there in that gutter with all the human waste. And what does the metaphor relate to? When you think of a channel with water flowing through it constantly with all kinds of smelly, stinky stuff, that really is, as he says, the impetuous thoughts of the brain. That's how the Zohar defines this word. The Zohar, this classic mystical text, says, what is, when it says bar hatim, it means in the gutters of my mind, the constant flow of little subconscious thoughts that bubble up, or worse, conscious daydreams that I might go on, or mulling over stress or mulling over anger, whatever it is, that constant flow of thought, that's the gutter we're talking about. And the spark of godliness, I'm taking it and I'm pushing it right into that. I'm pushing, the face of the ruler right into a toilet bowl, so to speak. Because if I consider what fleets through my mind and what I spend my time on and what I'm constantly thinking about, a lot of it is just ego stuff. A lot of it is just klipa. And some of it is fully, an avera, fully just, stuff that is destructive to the world and counterproductive for me to think about. So that's actually what I'm doing to the spark of my soul when I'm having my normal everyday, train of thought, is I'm taking the king's head and I'm shoving it right into that gutter. And would I ever do that? Would I go to, the governor of our state, say, please come to my house, I'd love to have you over, and they come over and like, here, I'd like you to experience my house and God forbid, do something like that. You'd be horrified, right, at the thought. So imagine how I'd feel about doing that, God forbid, to the ruler of rulers. And yet, that's what we're doing all the time. We do it all the time. And how much compassion should I feel? Oh my God. How could I even think of doing that? Does that make sense? Any questions about this? It's kind of heavy. It feels heavy now that we're learning it. Yeah, I know. It's a short chapter. This is supposed to be inspiring, and we got a little lost in the sort of the negativeness of the image. But the reason is so that we experience compassion for this spark. So we don't want to dwell on it so much that I start to get depressed, God forbid. And now he brings in another very, very famous piece, and that is Ki Yaakov Hevel Nachalato. Eleanor, is it you?
For Jacob, an appellation for the Jewish people is the rope of his inheritance.
Right, for Jacob is the rope of his inheritance. This is a powerful mashal, because I might think, this is happening. This is happening down here in the physical world, and okay, the spark of my soul is going for a negative ride. It's having a bad trip. But still, in the heavens, we're all united. In the heavens, everything's good. And so really, how bad could it be, right? What damage am I doing? No, says the Alter Rebbe, Jacob is the rope of your inheritance, right? We are all connected to God's name through this spark of our soul. And it's like a rope reaching up right to God's name, right to the hay of God's name where our soul extends from. And if I'm here at the bottom of a rope and that rope goes up doesn't matter how many thousands of miles, and attaches to something on top, and I pull on the bottom of the rope, what happens at the top of the rope? It comes down. And how much does it come down? Assuming the rope does not stretch, it comes down exactly the amount that I pulled down. Right? The effect above is the exact same as the effect on the bottom. So I shouldn't think, oh, you know what? Yeah, the spark of my soul is going through this, but you know what? It's just here in the world, and the world doesn't exist, doesn't affect God. No. Our soul is connected right to God's name. When I yank down on my soul by what I do here in the world, I'm also disconnecting, so to speak, that hey of God's name from the rest of God's name, because that's where my soul comes from. So if you imagine your soul is a rope reaching up to God's name, it's attached to the hey of God's name, you're yanking on it, that hey's like, hey, literally, hey, what are you doing down there, right? And if you pull hard enough, you dislocate it. And that's, in fact, what the Alter Rebbe describes as tshuva, repentance or atonement. That word tshuva means tashuv hey, return the hey. So it's actually a beautiful Hasidic piece that tshuva is not just me fixing myself or apologizing, it's actually when I've disconnected that hey, now tashuv hey, I'm returning the hey, because tshuva spells tashuv, right? Taf, shin, vav, vet, hey. So tashuv, and then hey, the last word, I'm returning the hey. And when I do tshuva, I'm taking that hey that I disconnected and I'm reattaching it. I'm repairing the effect that I had actually on God, on God's own name. So again, I shouldn't think it's just me. I'm actually affecting God, and I can have compassion on God, but I've taken a spark of God and brought it through all this. Yeah.
I'm a little hooked on the word appellation, that they would even use it here. Because I think of, strange dreams or,
Yeah, I think they just mean Jacob refers to an appellation. Yeah.
I know. It's just a strange word to use.
I don't know. I wouldn't go into the English connotations. These people that they're geniuses, the people that translated this, and many of them learned English as a second language. And so sometimes they're looking for the exact closest word for a Yiddish expression, and they'll find some, appellation is used, right? But they'll find some word that, no one uses even in academic life, and they'll say, that's exactly the word. And these guys are geniuses. They remember the entire dictionary, but they never grew up speaking English as a first language. They learned Yiddish, and then Hebrew, and then usually a few other languages, Russian and Polish. And then, the Rebbe's like, and you need to learn English so you can communicate. And it's okay, they learn English, right? But they don't really sometimes get the, what our associations are with words, and it can be funny. Right. So I wouldn't overdo which English word, Jacob represents the Jewish people. That's all he means.
Yeah. Okay.
I think.
It's just a funny word.
Yeah, I get it. V'chimshal hamoshech b'chevel.
As in the above illustration of one pulling a rope.
V'chulu and so forth. Go ahead one more. V'hu sod galut hashchina. Ooh.
Okay. And so forth. The Rabbi notes that this phrase may allude to the Gerut HaTeshuvah, chapter 5, where this matter is explained at length.
This is
the esoteric doctrine of the exile of the Shekhinah.
Right. So, as in this mashal where we're pulling a rope down, and this explains the mystery of the exile of the Shekhinah. Right. So we gotta fill the blanks in here. The exile of the Shekhinah. There's a few terms that we're going to use in this chapter that we used that all refer to the same thing, Malchut of Atzilus. So if you've done the Kabbalah with us, and again, you can go to Intro to Kabbalah chapter, it's a five-part class that goes through all this. In the highest world of Atzilus, where everything is just godliness, there is no created world at all, right? It's all just godliness. Still, there's something called Malchut, the lowest of the Sfirot. That is the same as the Shekhinah. When we say the dwelling of the Shekhinah, that's Malchut of Atzilus. It's also the same as Knesset Yisrael, the bank of souls. Because all of our souls are sourced there in Malchus of Atzilus, or the Shekhinah, or Knesset Yisrael. So what happens when the spark of my soul comes down and is enclosed in my body, and now it's subject to all of my ego's decisions and thoughts and train of consciousness, And yet, it's my source of life. It's actually making that all happen. Now the Shekhinah itself is being exiled. Right? It's being exiled. So that refers to, when the Jewish people are physically in exile. We say the Shekhinah travels with them. When we went to Babylonia, then the Shekhinah was there instead of in the temple. It accompanies us. But also internally, it means this spark of my soul is trapped in my own decision making, in my own ego. It's in exile. And you'd think you'd be able to shortcut it and say, well, hold on, Smolash, not that, right? Or hold on, Smolash, that's enough. But I can't. I have free will my whole life. And I can just keep making bad decision after bad decision. And the Shekhinah, Malchut of Atzilus, the source of my soul and of all souls of Israel, is going along for the ride and is actually making that happen. So that's what it means to be in exile, to no longer be in control of who you are and what you can do, and to be doing the exact opposite. This spark of God is coming down and going through this whole process with me. Yes, I think let's pause there. We'll pick up this chapter. I think we've elaborated why I should feel compassion for the spark of God. And next class we're going to learn about what happens when I do have that compassion, why it is that can draw down this Ava Rabbah, this great love, which is goes again into the relationship between Yaakov. It's just on the next page if you want to look up, like Jacob kissed Rachel, and we get to very inspiring stuff. So sorry if it was a bit of a downer so far, but let's talk for a moment. We have 20 minutes about what's happening tonight, and that is, I said, Yutes Kislev. It's the anniversary of the liberation of the author of our text, the Alter Rebbe. This is, I think, it's not good with dates, 1798. The Alter Rebbe was imprisoned. And I said last week, really when the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid Mizrich and the Alter Rebbe and the other disciples of the Maggid Mizrich introduced this form of Kabbalah, the Jewish world, especially the intellectual Jewish world, had a war against it. They reacted so poorly because, they said, you're not allowed to teach Kabbalah in such a revealed way. It's supposed to be just for experts, just for the chosen few, just for people that can spend all their time learning texts and have, the resources to sit and learn all day. Only they can understand this stuff and should be taught this stuff. Otherwise, it should be secret. And B, it's so new. You guys are so happy. It's crazy. That's not Judaism. They actually wrote in a letter to the Tsar when they accused the Alter Rebbe of teaching. They accused the Alter Rebbe actually of what's it called when you treason, which was ridiculous. But they also said, here's proof that he's not even teaching Judaism. This is something brand new, something invented. And one of the proofs was, and the letter exists still in the library, that all his students are so happy. They're so joyful. And Judaism is serious and sad because the temple was destroyed and Jews are supposed to be serious and sad. So if his students are all happy and dancing and singing, that's proof that this isn't really Judaism. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Yeah, wow. And now we've internalized Hasidus so much that we think, Kabbalah Chabad is about joy, and doing a mitzvah you're supposed to be happy. It's infused the whole Jewish community, know it or not. So we can't even imagine you'd say that, but they literally wrote that in an official letter to the Tsar himself, saying that's proof that this is not Judaism, that they're happy. Can you imagine? So for many reasons they were having a war against it, and in the end they just made up a bunch of stories about the Alter Rebbe and got him arrested. The Alter Rebbe was in jail, serious charges, could have been executed, could have been sent off to wherever for life. And as I said before, the Alter Rebbe said, this is proof that there's actually a debate in heaven about whether this form of Kabbalah is allowed. Whether it's just, I put too much out there, maybe I went too far, and they're having a debate. And you'll know when I'm released, especially if I'm released in any way miraculously, that it was decided we can teach this and then we'll go even fuller force. And what was it? I have the, pardon me, I don't remember the quote. Let me look this up. So when the Alter Rebbe was in jail, and this was tomorrow, so this starts tonight, there's celebrations all over the world tonight for this. Oh, I didn't save the page. The Alter Rebbe was reading Psalms, and he read, I forget the exact what he read, that my soul will be released and God will take it out. It's one of these lines, like a 2-part line about I'll be released from confinement. And as he goes through the first half of the line, he gets a knock. Right? Say, Rabbi, stand up, we have news for you. And in the middle of reciting this line, they tell him, now you're going to be released, you're going to be freed. And then he finishes the line afterwards. And so when he told that to his students, they realized this really shows that now the heavenly trial was done, he was exonerated, he's allowed to teach this, and in the several centuries, this has really blown up all over the world, even such that we printed our own Tanya here, right? This is, 1,000-something edition of this original Tanya. It's the same edition. So that's what's celebrated tonight, is the Alter Rebbe's release. It's called the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. And let's finish with a little story about the Alter Rebbe, just to give you a sense not of the drama around this day, but of the power around this day. That's he's called Shneor, 2 lights, because those who learned with him recognized that he actually had 2 powerful lights. One light was this spiritual light of bringing Kabbalah in a new way to the world, but the second was actually just the light of good old-fashioned, plain intellectual Judaism. He was such a genius, such a giant, that he understood all of the Jewish texts completely from the day he could speak. He could see through any problem. He understood any question or any issue, whether it was Talmud or whether it was Halakha, whatever it was. He had such a giant mind for that, and he actually wrote his own code of Jewish law, right? Which is the second major. The first, he wrote this before the Tanya. So he was not just a spiritual giant, but an intellectual giant. And when he was teaching Hasidus in much more compact forms, one of the pieces he taught was on a law that you can lead an animal out with a collar, and you can bring it in with a collar. And this is just a nuts and bolts debate, right, in Jewish law about on Shabbat. If you're leading an animal around and the animal has a collar on, is that now carrying the collar, and are you breaking Shabbat? So it's a very, very straightforward physical debate about something that affects a lot of villagers. They've got these animals, and they need to know, are we allowed to lead them around on Shabbos with a collar or not, right? And so here's the Alter Rebbe teaching. He says, yes, I know that that's what it means in the physical world, but in the spiritual world it means something else, because the word they use for collar is shir. It's a synonym. So shir means collar. Shir also means song. And it says, and the Alter Rebbe teaches what this verse also means is that the animals, when they're being led in and out, in other words, angels and souls, when they're going up and connecting with God, and then when they're coming back down into their bodies, having been refreshed, they're led in and they're led out with shir, with a song. And it's through song that angels and souls rise up and connect to God, and then come back down and re-engage in their physical existence. So of course the Hasidim are like, oh, this is amazing, we love this, let's dance and sing, and how beautiful. And then the opponents of Hasidus, all these very educated intellectual Jews, they said, this is the biggest piece of nonsense, right? How can your big tzaddik, your big Rebbe teach that angels are going up and souls are going up, and it's song, it's talking about a collar, And nowhere were they more inflamed by this teaching than in the town of Shklov. Because Shklov was an area that was the center of this intellectual Judaism, which is great, right? Great to learn Judaism and debate. But there in that town, they ridiculed this teaching so much that the few Hasidim that lived in this town, they just kept their heads down, right? They understood it, were inspired by the Alter Rebbe. They knew what was going on. But in this town, you couldn't talk about it. People were just laughing their heads off that this supposed genius was teaching that a shir, a collar, is really a song and angels, and you can imagine. So one day the Alter Rebbe was traveling around. He was coming to Shklov, to this town, and his Hasidim, were excited to have him. But even more excited, perhaps, were the greatest scholars of the town, because on the one hand, they knew that the Alter Rebbe was a great genius, and they had questions that they wanted to bring to him because they wanted the answers, and they thought maybe he could figure this stuff out. So everybody had, where they were holding, and they had some complex question that they were working on. And if I can only bring it to the Alter Rebbe, maybe he'll untangle it for me. But on the other hand, they wanted to make fun of the Alter Rebbe and cut him down and say, let's see how smart he really is. I mean, you're a genius for these crazy Hasidim who talk about these songs and stuff, but, do you really hold up in Shklov? So the Alter Rebbe was coming through, and he arrives, and as he's with his students, all these great intellectuals come and they say, I've got some questions for the Alter Rebbe. Can you answer this query I'm working on, and this? And all these questions are piling up, and the Alter Rebbe is listening to them all, and he's just saying nothing. He's just saying nothing. It was very strange, right? You'd think, he'd come in town, he'd debate, he'd share, he'd prove himself, and they're just getting nothing from him, right? So finally they said, please, will you come and give a lecture for us in the town hall? Come and give a lecture, and maybe there you'll answer our questions. He's like, okay, I'll agree to that. And they leave. So now the news has traveled around that this great genius came, and he couldn't answer even the first of these questions. He was just silenced by them. So they think, well, maybe he's really going to be embarrassed. And they all gather around. They get even more sharp questions, and they're just ready to cut the Alter Rebbe apart. And the town is gathered, and the Hasidim are looking, and the Alter Rebbe goes up to the lectern, and he looks at them and he says, I know all of you have come with many questions, many complex knots to untie. And so I'm going to try to untie them, but not by answering your questions, but I'll untie them because angels and souls are led up by song, and angels and souls are brought back down into their bodies through song. And then the Alter Rebbe, instead of answering questions, started singing a nigun that he'd written. Right? It's such a holy nigun that you're not supposed to sing it except for on certain days. I hope anyone watching will forgive me. It's Erev Yutes Kislev, so I'll do a little shtickle of it. You sing it at weddings and at very special days. Ayama mama ma, ayama mama ma, ay ya ya ya, ay ya 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 ya, ay ya 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 ya, and it goes on. You sing each part twice. There's 4 stanzas that stand for the 4 spiritual words. It's beautiful. And they were all in this trance as he sang this long nigun. And the whole room was silent. And then he finished. And they found their minds had all gone up to some place where everything was unraveled and everything was made clear. Then their minds were brought back down into their ego, into their consciousness. And suddenly, everyone in the room, every answer they had been answered. Every question they'd had been answered. And then they realized, okay. Goes up and goes down with song. And one of the people in the room was a big intellectual Jew. And he said, I was there. I'd come with 4 perplexing questions that I'd been working on. And my mind went up with the song. And then it all just unraveled and came apart. And it was clear. And it came down. And I felt like I was looking at the world fresh, like a newborn baby. And all of my questions had been answered. And he became a big chassid, a notable chassid. So this is the power of the Alter Rebbe. I just want to share a little bit of that today. Any questions about that? Time seems to have stood still. It looks like it's only 11:22, so I want to do a little more. I thought that would take me 25 minutes, and it took me just a few. So let's do a few more lines before we go.
Well, I have a comment.
Yes.
Interesting that the Torah portion is with Jacob and the ladder.
Yeah.
Just at this time,
It's very timely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, it's always close to this time. And, of course, for Hasidim, it's beautiful that all this stuff is connected. But, we're learning not on the regular schedule. Like, we're learning our own pace. So,
right.
For us, we just happen to be learning this now, but nothing coincidence. Actually, let's meditate. We've done enough learning. Let's find ourselves in a nice upright position. Just let your eyes close. Perhaps imagine you're sitting in that study hall and the Alter Rebbe is singing that melody and your mind is flowing upwards with the tune. And let your breath deepen like a newborn baby's breath. Big, deep in-breaths, smooth. With your belly expanding. Deep exhales. New innocent breathing. Let's even out the 4 stages of our breath with me breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Remain full. 2, 3, 4. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4. And remain empty. 2, 3. Start again. 4 counts each. 2, 3, 4, staying full, 2, 3, 4, breathing out, 2, 3, 4, remaining empty, 2, 3. As we continue, please open up that wisdom gateway we've been engaging with. Our wisdom gateway is the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. So there's an emptiness between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. Opens quite naturally. It's a spiritual process. Let it open wider and wider. Perhaps reach out further and further. And let's place in that gateway this meditation we're learning. That we can have great compassion on the spark of our soul for descending so far down to this physical body. And when we do, as we'll learn, we'll be filled with this very lofty form of love, Ava Rabba. Just picture that spiritual concept, how far the soul has descended to be lodged in your body, and just let that fill your mind. Let that fill your mind and see how your emotions are engaged. If you're watching in the future, feel free, as I say, to pause your video or let it run. Who knows what'll play next? It might be very nice. And stay here for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. This meditation, we let the divine concept fill our mind, fill that wisdom gateway. So any distracting thoughts, just let this divine concept flow into that part of your mind. Fill it up like wine filling up a cup, right to the brim. And notice any sense of compassion, any sense of mercy, any sense of wanting to help that spark of your soul, wanting to bring it back to its source. Let's wiggle our toes and fingers. If you're here with us in class, open our eyes. Wishing everybody a wonderful Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. You should have a year filled with wonderful light. If you're watching this in real time, there's lots of celebrations for Brangans all over, so just look online for the nearest one to you, and we'll see you next class.